Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Jan's Opening Clinic, Season 27, Episode number 3. The show where Chess24 premium users get to ask me questions about opening theory, and I'll do my best to answer them, hopefully to everyone's satisfaction. If you want to ask me a question on the next clinic, become a premium user using the voucher code Yanistan. You get 40% off. Today, from the question I've seen, we we almost have a thematic Italian opening episode, which is always good news for me because I need to try to keep up with the Italian, which is such a confusing opening. Although it looks simple, there are so many move orders and so many ways to go. So I appreciate the questions, although, yeah, I'm not sure I have all the answers. But let's get into it. And I think to warm up, we start with a bit of Queen's Gambit Accepted. FBardamu is saying, recently, a new move has become popular at top level in the QGA. After d4, d5, c4, dc, e4, b5, which used to be a sideline, a4, c6, takes, knight c3. Players like Aronian, Kayaki, Dominguez, and Zhong have played queen b6, a move which can lead to some wild complications after the critical knight d5, while 7b3 looks like a safe answer. What do you feel is the best way to tackle this move? Best regards, FBardamu. Let's first tackle the chessboard. And have a look. So pawn to d4, pawn to d5, c4 takes. Good old Queen's Gambit Accepted, which we're seeing a lot recently, sometimes with knight f3, knight f6 included. We've mainly seen the slower lines and not so much of 3e4, at least in this, for example, in the Superbet tournament, which was currently running. I'm not sure if b5 is the reason, but it is very much a trendy new line. So let's have a look at what FBardamu says. Pawn to a4, pawn to c6. So far, so good. A takes b, c takes b, knight to c3. And here, the latest wrinkle is this move queen b6, which looks natural enough, covering the pawn. But I think was just considered to be bad until recently. The old quote-unquote main line here is pawn to a6, and then after takes. Rook takes a8, bishop to b7. And black is trying to get compensation for the exchange, which you could debate if it's enough or not. It's close, but computers like white. So the new try is different. It's trying to hang on to this pawn, at least for now. FBardamu already mentioned the sharp knight d5 and the solid b3. So let's have a brief look at those. Knight to d5, queen to b7. It looks like white is more or less winning after bishop f4, threatening this check. But this is where modern engines come in, and they give this amazing pawn to e5, bishop takes, and knight to d7. And somehow, there's nothing easy for white. Knight c7 check doesn't really work yet because of the king d8, followed by takes. This is a pretty painful check. 1 point, or the main point being that after king e2, queen takes e4 happens to be checkmate. So white can't do that. He has to go bishop to f4 here, keeping this check in reserve. And the line continues. Knight f6, knight c7, king d8, takes. Queen takes the pawn with check. Knight to e2, queen takes a8. And we have a weird position where white is an exchange up, but black has a pawn and a fairly healthy structure. The king is on d8. That doesn't seem to be fatal. Like, I've looked at this a bit, and it does seem like black is hanging in there. There's a bunch of theory here, and some games were played as well. Knight c3, bishop b4 seems to be the main line. Pawn to f3, rook e8 check. Now white has a choice, king f2 or bishop e2. Bishop e2 looks normal enough. And now, I think there was a game with knight d5, maybe by Levon, which my computer didn't like. My computer says if you go a5 here, the black is more or less okay, which looks very believable. Like castles, queen to c6. And although the king is weird, black has excellent pieces, still has a pawn for the exchange, so it's not a big material deficit. And it does seem like a reasonable position. So I don't think this direct line is the way to bust it. If it were, this line also wouldn't be as popular, queen b6, because obviously the world-class players that play this, they will have had a look at the direct lines. FBardamu mentioned b3, which is a safe way to get a tiny edge, but also not a way to refute this opening. Now black returns the pawn and tries to develop quickly with bishop b4. I think bishop d2 is what they do. Takes, and this pawn is probably a little hot to handle. But after knight e7 here, could make a case for knight f6 too, but I like knight e7, so you don't get hit by e5. Once again, it seems like what computers say white is a little better, but black does seem very solid. Like knight f3, castle, a5, something along these lines. And you could keep pressing the button. It seems like black is hanging in there. Although in practice, if you make some computer moves here, black has to know pretty well what he's doing. So trying something like this and checking how well they've done their homework might not be the worst idea. But computers are, of course, defending this. I don't know, I could give you more. Random computer lines, bishop f4, takes. Somehow this rook is trapped. But after rook b7 or bishop b7, it looks like black should survive. So it's a decent line. I'll give you one try, which I thought was interesting. I'm not claiming this is a refutation, but people will of course be prepared for knight d5 and b3. There's also been experiments with bishop e2. I think Duda might have played this, but it didn't convince me that much either. I kind of like the move bishop e3, which, well, it's nothing special. It's a developing move, maybe threatening d5, maybe b3 at some point. And it's not so obvious what black should be doing. The best move is pawn to e6, which also makes a lot of sense, playing to meet d5 with bishop c5. Here, if we go for this anyway, d5, bishop c5, takes, and knight f3, this position turned out to be not so simple for black. So I kind of like this as a try. If black plays a natural move like a6, at least natural to my mind, then he's in trouble directly. After d takes e, bishop takes e6. White goes queen d4. And this construction is collapsing, you can see. The engine is already extremely happy. So a6 no good. The best move appears to be knight to f6. Developing, and once again we wanna trade queens. Queen d4 and takes is once again bad for black. So black has to go for weird stuff here, queen to b4. And if they haven't checked bishop e3, which I guess is not impossible, because it's not among the top 2-3 computer choices, then this position won't be fun for black to play. White now develops with bishop e2. Once again, seems like the only good move for black is to take here, after which becomes a giant mess. Queen e5 check, bishop e6, rook takes a7. Don't ask me why, it works. Only move for black is knight fd7. Queen takes here, hitting this rook, takes, and now it strictly only moves for black, which is always nice. Well, white's moves were kind of forced, but he chose the line. Queen f8, takes, e takes d. Still a mess, and if you keep clicking here, unfortunately black survives, but barely, which is normally the nature of decent preparation. If black finds these 100 moves in a row, he will make a draw, but we ask some questions. So bishop g4, knight b5, takes, gf. Well, the lines continue. Rook a2, knight d6, knight b6. This is just, obviously, the first comp line. Takes. We get something like this, which black should hold, but white has an extra pawn. So it's not the end of the world. And as far as I can see, we're at move 25. In computer's world after bishop e3, this is reasonably forcing. So I'd give that a try if I ever got this, hoping that nobody's watching our little opening clinic here, which I think is a fair hope, unfortunately. Black has some alternatives here, wherever queen b7, but they're risky. Even g3, bishop g2. Yeah, it looks like black's development won't be easy. So my recommendation is this move. If you want a safe, tiny edge, b3 is fine. If you want to mess, knight d5 is fine too, but no one's going to be caught by surprise by knight d5 here. But yeah, it's certainly a new and interesting line that I'd also noticed. Thank you for the question, Mr. FBardamu. Let's move on to RWC94. And we start with the Italian. Hi Jan, good to have you back. Pleasure to be back. What do you think is the status of the early d5 lines in the Italian that you recommended back in your Chess 24 series? That's some years ago, but I know what you're talking about for sure. Since then, a5 plans have become a lot more fashionable than a6. Do you think one or the other is particularly preferable in combination with an early d5? Do you see the critical lines after a5 being the Dutch bishop b3, queen d3 lines? Thanks. I'm just confused by the Dutch bishop b3, queen d3, because those are usually without a4, a5. No, but okay, we can have a look. So here we have a chessboard. Good old Italian, e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop c4. Let's say bishop c5, castles, knight f6, d3, castles, pawn to c3, and pawn to d5. This is what I gave in the Chess 24 series a while ago, and I still like the intention, because I've never been a big fan of all these slow Italians where you can't remember, is this the right move or not? D6 and a6, d6, a5, h6. So forcing the issue, I do quite enjoy, and it seems like it's still extremely topical at the highest levels. Like, I think today at the time of recording, which is Friday the 13th, there was a game, was it Ali Reza against Aronian, who just debated this? Since I did the series, a bunch of things happened. Most notably, what's not in this series is this knight bd2, knight b6, sorry, this rook e1, bishop g4, knight bd2, knight to b6, and the move bishop b3, which I think, I can't recall, but I think I didn't cover it back then. I wasn't aware of it back then, but this has very much become the mainline invention of our dear friend Jordan van Foreest. And this remains very, very topical, as mentioned, was played today. Queen takes d. Sorry, I mix up all the lines. Apologies. Knight b6. All right, yeah, slow down. You start with h3 here. Important to force the bishop to h5. Bishop to h5. Bishop to b3. This was the move I didn't cover. I can't recall what I covered. I guess bishop b5, pawn to b4, things like that. But bishop b3 now is very much the main move. When black usually takes, I also saw a game recently with king h8, but I don't trust this line much. Takes, knight takes e5, queen to f5. The knight goes back, and it looks like black should be perfectly fine, but somehow things aren't so simple. These knights are a bit out of play, and white can get the piece out quite quickly. For more details here, I looked at Anish's Chessable course, who gave this for white. You can check that out. He has some lines. He also had an interesting game recently with black, where he went rook f8, and I think he won against, I can't recall against who it was, but against somebody strong. So black can equalize here, but it's not trivial. And white has these small questions to ask. So I very much understand the popularity of this line. At the highest levels, it seems like it's a free roll, and somehow Ali Reza often manages to confuse people in these positions. Today's game was queen e2, knight d5, and Ali Reza tried queen to e4, which is not the main try. Knight e4 is the move the engines want, and what has been played more frequently here. After knight e4, you get this endgame, right? Takes, 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 bishop b6. And black should be fine, like Levon has some game here, but he has to pay some attention. I think Levon's game was something like a4, h6, and Levon even won with black. But it is still black who has to be careful here. Also have to move some move like king f1 or bishop g5. My computers are holding this, but it's certainly a line that we'll keep seeing for a bit. And yeah, it depends how much you hate this. If you think it makes d5 unplayable, like I said, a lot of top players are still going here, and I guess they're confident they can defend this with black, but it seems like this is the main battleground. And then the lines you mentioned, I guess, about a4, a6 or a5, were after a4 here. No, sorry. Once again, after a4 here, which looks a bit random, but is also a tricky move, preparing to grab space here with b4, but not committing yet. And I gave a6 in this series, which back then I gave with the intent of making it more combative, and I think there a6 is still more fun than a5. Fun sounds the wrong word, but it's more of a play for 3 results. I have to admit, though, that we're probably, in order to clean it, a5, which has been the choice at the highest levels recently, does seem a little safer. The problem with a5, or the problem is strong, but once again, if both sides know what they're doing, it tends to lead more or less by force to some sort of dryish endgames, which I guess can be held. But I wasn't sure how happy I am there. Something like this. Knight to e4. The main line seems to be knight a7, h3, bishop h5, pawn to d4. Let's say takes here, queen takes d4. I think they take, knight takes, and go bishop g6. Wesley So had a game here with black, and I think he made it draw quite comfortably. And I'm sure this can be cleaned up to holding, but it's also not everybody's idea of fun, where black still has to make some decent moves here, like the f4. You need to go f5, and there might be some minor suffering involved. Although, as I said, it seems like they are very much holding this at the top levels. As for, I can't quite recall what I gave, but I do recall I gave a6 here. Then rook e1, bishop g4, let's say h3, bishop h5, knight bd2. The plan was to go f6, trying to keep the center and being more ambitious, which I still like strategically. But computers, as they tend to do, they do ask a few questions. Like here, pawn to b4. If the bishop goes here, then I think this might not be in the series, because computers didn't give it back then. Bishop a3 seemed a bit unpleasant, hinting at b5, and after rook e8, queen b3, bishop f7, d4. We're under a bit of pressure. So now my now 5 years wiser and stronger computer, after b4, says bishop to e7, which is a bit sad, because of course I prefer it here, but these guys are hard to argue with. Now after queen b3, bishop f7, looks like black is hanging in there. It's a matter of taste. If you prefer these positions, which might be slightly worse, but where things could still happen, or the a5 positions, which are a little drier. I don't think it's refuted, but I also noticed that the trust in these a6 lines seems to have gone down. And my best guess is the reason is this. Pawn to b4 directly. The other line is knight to e4. Bishop goes away. I guess I always want to go here. Pawn to b4, king h8. Let's say bishop d2, which once again is very, very complicated. I think I want knight c7. Compy also gives a5, b5, and then knight c7. So these are complicated, full-fledged games where, yeah, what is the computer is having some doubts for black. I'll admit that much. But at the very least, we get the non-standard Italian typical position I was hoping for with this d5 and a6. But basically, I'm making excuses that at the time I recorded the series, it looked like after a4, a6 was fine, while now with stronger engines, a4. a5 seems like the clean way to equalize, while sacrificing some fun. I hope that is answering the question. I'm not sure if we forgot anything. Bishop b3 here. Oh, hang on, I guess it's h3 first. Then you could take everything in with a4 and a5 included. This seemed fine for black last time I checked. So as usual, I end up confusing myself and everybody else in these Italian positions. I still have sympathy for castles and d5 because, yeah, it's the only way to get a more open position, which I usually try to do whenever possible. But there are all these forcing lines which lead to almost equal but somewhat tedious endgames, which I just covered, which one has to live with when deciding if you want to do this, or we'll have more Italian questions later about d6, a5 and whatnot. So yeah, I still have sympathy for it, and I think it still works, especially the c3, d5 line. Recently, they've also started playing h3 more here. We've seen Anish do it. And then there are debates. Of course, black could still go back to a6, d6, a5, h6, whatnot. But there are also debates here. Knight bd2, which is also interesting. But still nothing I think that should discourage black from going for these lines. I hope that answers your question. Short version. a6, board full of pieces, but slightly dodgy. a5, equal, but slightly boring. What do we have next? This, by the way, I should address. I'm not going to answer non-premium questions. I'm not sure, because there's no way for me to track if they were premiums at the time of asking. I'm not sure what a fair solution there would be. Maybe we should pass it on to the suits, because I can't say, of course, we can't, or I think they can't stop people from asking questions that aren't premium. But it's, of course, a bit strange if I just ignore them. Well, they were premium at the time of writing, so apologies for that. I'm not sure. Maybe we can find a solution there. Pino724 is saying, hello, Jan sir. I really could use your help with Queen's Gambit declined. Would like to see how you play it. All right. I'm not quite sure what the question is there. That sounds very general. I sometimes play it. You can watch my Banter Blitzes or my Twitch channel, Yanistan TV, and you'll see me playing some Queen's Gambits, usually badly and cursing. But it is an opening I like. It's tough to show you one line on, or two lines on how I play it, because it's such a gigantic field. So basically you're telling me d4, d5, c4, e6, what do you do? And that obviously greatly depends on white's choices here. So I'm not sure I'll be able to tell you very much. Knight c3, knight f6. The usual question is black comfortable playing the Karlsbad, or does he do what most top players are doing, which is to start after d4 with knight f6, and after c4 to go e6. And then only after knight f3 you go d5, and you live with the whatever line you want to play after knight c3. I'm not much of a bishop e7 guy here, which technically I guess is the Queen's Gambit declined. I usually play dc4, or on a wild day I might bring the bishop all the way here. And I have some sympathy. I'm not sure. I might do this in my new chessable course. I have to decide about this. For this move c5 as well, trying to force the issue. So here I'm not a big specialist on bishop e7. I've never felt too comfortable in these positions after bishop f4, castles e3, but that doesn't mean that they're not playable. Black has a big choice here between knight bd7, b6, and c5, which are all seen frequently at the highest levels. I guess currently the debates in c5 are still around. This position, is it? Once again, I'm worried. I might mix up something. Or rook to d1, and here there are all these moves: rook e8, rook d8, bishop e7, which, yeah, are all very complex. I'm not sure, since your question was very general, that this is where we should be heading. But could also be lack of knowledge, frankly, or lack of looking at it with black. I've never been too happy about all these positions after bishop f4, which is why here I've usually preferred more quote-unquote forcing moves like d takes c4. In the past I've played c6, bishop b4, c5, you name it. And then, yeah, the other big question, as I mentioned initially, is after d4, d5, c4, e6, knight c3, knight f6. If you're comfortable with this, which of course helps a lot repertoire-wise, because then you don't have to learn the Nimzo-Indian, which is nice, but it's also not a walk in the park. I think we had a question, maybe it was the last episode, about c6, e3, bishop to f5, queen f3, which once again is an attempt to force the issue somewhat and play this endgame, which, I don't know, it's not really my style, but every time I look at it, it looks like black is doing fine. You can look back at that question for more details. And recently, the likes of Ali Reza, they are playing somewhat in a classical way all the way through an h6, which we used to not do in the old days, and are going for these types of positions, which always historically were considered somewhat better for white, but once again, computers are changing everything we thought we knew about chess. For example, here f3 looks like a normal move, and now black start playing pawn to b5, which in the old days you would have been banned from your pioneer's palace. But this is what they do now, intending a timely pawn to b4, sometimes bishop b7, a6, c5, or bishop b7, b4, c5. And it's an interesting line, and it's led far enough that now we see the likes of Caruana play the move a4 here, which once again, in the old days, you would have been laughed out of the building because you're giving up on the traditional plan, rook b1, b4, b5, the minority attack. But times are changing. Now, all of a sudden, it's more important to stop b5 here than going for b5 ourselves. So I'm following all these things, and it's interesting debates. But yeah, if you ask how I played, I would probably dare going for these lines. I can't recall what Ali Reza did. Did he play knight h5? Takes, a5, a6. Which computers like a little for white, but I don't think it's that bad. There's always some counterplay on the king side. And this structure, especially after a4, with the queen side being fixed, I don't think it's easy for white to get anything done. So I'm very curious where the journey will go here, but I don't have a fixed answer how I play the Queen's Gambit declined. Mainly because the question is worded too generally. But in the main lines, as I said, after knight f3, I'm not a big bishop e7 guy. If I was, I would probably try to specialize a bit more, probably in c5 here. And the Karlsbad, I change my mind all the time, but I would choose between either the c6 and after e3 going for bishop f5. Queen c2 also exists when one line that seems popular now is h6 and bishop e6. And the quote-unquote more classical h6, bishop e7. Try to follow Ali Reza, like I just showed. I'm not sure this answers your question at all, but yeah, I need more details for more detailed answers. Thanks for the question anyway. And here we go. Back to the Italian. I can never tell if this is an L or an I. It's lonesboule. He's saying, hi Jan, a couple of years ago you released this repertoire for Black against Italian on Chess24 based on 3 bishop c5, and which I still follow to this day. even after buying your 1 e5 on chessable, which switches to 3 knight f6, admittedly by laziness. I did switch for a reason though, and one reason is what you bring up in your question. There was this very critical line that went e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop c4, bishop c5, c3, knight f6, d4, ed, e5, d5, bishop b5, knight e4, takes, bishop b6, knight c3, bishop g4, bishop e3, castle h3, bishop h5, queen c2. I can read chess moves really quickly. Well, you recommend bishop a5, and after castles, you said we could just force a draw. Was that my wording? After bishop f3, gf, knight d4, bishop d4, knight, queen g5, king h1, bishop c3, bc, queen f5, and you stopped here, saying white couldn't avoid the perpetual check. Times have changed. Engines continue there now. I am aware of that. However, it turns out that there have been several games these last years, including one by Dominguez Perez with black, where white went 18 rook fc1 takes, and I actually got this exact position in online blitz once where my opponent blundered with king f1. But after queen d1, queen f5, the game seems very much alive. There's also Wesley's who recommended this line for white in his chessable course, except he gave bishop c3 instead of bc. So that definitely seems to be a little something for white. Then one could argue, I tried to analyze these positions with my limited means some time ago and forgot more or less everything. Right, so I would like to hear, save your analysis, that helps. None of us can ever remember anything. Just like to hear your thoughts on them. How big do you think is white's advantage? Why are you giving up? Why are we claiming white has an advantage? Would you even recommend going for them, since we know you're not? We now know they're not this easy bailout to draw we thought they were. Obviously, within the realm of what you can reveal about such a critical line, given your job as second. Yeah, I don't think there are any particularly bridges to burn here for me, but I've more or less, with black at least mentally, moved on from that territory a bit, because as I said, as you said, in my chessable course, which is more recent, I switched to knight f6, and I like it much better, because the trade-off is always with bishop c5 you allow these c3, knight f6, d4 lines, which we'll get to in more detail in a minute, and to a lesser extent the Evans Gambit, while with knight f6 you allow mainly knight g5, but I really like these lines for black, and pawn to d4, which we also, I think, have a question, maybe later or in an upcoming episode. And I just think allowing these two is less of an issue than allowing these c3, knight f6, d4 lines. First of all, for practical reasons, because here white can make more or less a draw in these lines, which you don't always want, or also in the line we'll get into now. Didn't look like black has that many winning chances. So this line we're talking about is takes, c takes d, bishop b6, knight c3, bishop g4, h3, sorry, bishop e3 first. I guess it doesn't matter. Castles, h3, bishop h5, queen c2. Frankly, one of the reasons that I stopped being that interested here with black is also that white seems to have a ton of options. They've tried them all against Magnus in these champion chess tour games, and quite often he struggled a bit, like rook c1, queen b3, queen a4. I can't even remember. I guess you can castle here. And it just seemed like it's too complex a territory. And with less upside than these lines after 3 knight f6. So I thought that was a good switch. But back in whenever I did this series, I was still very much team bishop c5. And here I gave this move, which was a bit of a quirky sideline. I still think it holds up, but you are, of course, correct that here white can continue the game. I had this once in Bundesliga, and then I decided there's not a lot of upside to trying to force a draw here, and I did something ridiculous and was much worse quickly, which I also wasn't proud of. I guess knight g5 here is not that ridiculous. Takes. If you want an alternative, I guess this is kind of playable, but I'm also not sure I'd be endorsing this. So the line is this: knight d4, bishop d4, queen g5. King h1 takes here. And white takes with either the pawn or the bishop. And queen to f5. Let's start with this. bc queen f5, which I think you mentioned you had in the blitz game. Obviously, white can force a perpetual here with f takes e4, which also for practical reasons we don't always want. But now that we're here, knight to g5, bishop e2. This I still think is sort of fine for black. Queen to f5. And my computer at bigger depths gives 0-0 here, which looks very believable. Black has what, 3 pawns. The white king is sort of open. Rook e8, rook e6 is there, f6 is there, b6, c5. Like, you could continue analyzing here, but it looked to me like this should be fine for black. And for example, king g2, f6. I start getting zeros on my screen yet again. So with computers, this one will be held, I think, with no particular issues. The trickier one is this move, bishop takes c3, queen f5, and now once again rook fc1, which is bold, of course, but this continues. I checked this a bit, not today, but some time ago, and I did realize that this was a serious mess. One reason, as I said, for switching to my recommendation of 3 knight f6 in the chessable course. So this line continues, bishop e2, queen h6 for whatever reason. I want to give a check and go here, but it's not very intuitive. Also, white's play. So white also has to be brave to go for this. The line continues like f4, check, king g2 only move, check, king f3 only move. And after knight g6, you can keep clicking a bit. I do think that black holds in the end, at least according to my clicking adventures here. But it is, of course, very, very double-edged. Rook h1, queen g5. White has a choice between rook to g1 or bishop to d3. Bishop d3, how did this go? d4, bishop d2, knight h4. I don't know, it's just random computer lines. And in the end, I did see the zeros on my screen. But I will admit, it's not a simple forced draw at all. It's a mess. But here, it did seem like, see, computer's still thinking. This is a weaker engine, but the big one was spitting out the zeros. But yeah, very much saying, oof, these lines are tough and very unintuitive. Instead of bishop d3, there was also the more natural looking rook ag1, knight h4, takes, queen f5. But once again, given time, the number drops. But I also understand that the fun factor could be limited. So this endgame, stronger engine also starts yelling zeros. But I have to admit, I would pick white with the bishops in practice. So I don't know. I moved on from these lines because I thought they were bad equity. Either white will force the draw or they will be well prepared in this. Bishop takes c3, rook fc1. Theoretically, one could defend them, but yeah, as I said, I didn't really enjoy them all that much. So I only played this bishop a5 once. I don't know, like, as I said, the problem is not only this h3, queen c2, but the million other tries white has here. Queen c2 directly, h3, rook c1, h3, queen b3, queen a4, and so on. That this territory always bothered me. And even Magnus, who had this repeatedly with black, didn't seem to be that thrilled there. And recently in the match, he played 3 knight f6 as well. So I'm not sure if I have a shortcut for you here. I don't think there's anything particularly wrong with the classical line. Bishop g6 instead of bishop a5. Queen b3, knight e7, castle c6, bishop d3. Recently, Aronian was always a good guy to follow in all these things. He went for this against Ray Robson, I believe. Yep. And he even won with black It's another one of those that start with the computer giving a bit of an edge, but at least less play. So I would probably, if I was forced to play this, switch to this. I think you can click your way home here in these lines I just showed after bishop a5. I'm not sure what Wesley's giving here in all this mess, but I guess he also has computers and will give one of these lines, which are tricky. And I would not, although I think they're still holding, I would probably not enjoy the process greatly. So apologies, like times have changed a little bit, and for me, after years of thinking bishop c5 was easier because of the rise of the c3 d4 stuff, I now think that knight f6 is a more economical way to deal with the Italian. Hope that helped a bit. Thanks for the question. You are, of course, very right on all the points. What's next? Breaker 90 asking about the Italian for a change. Hey Jan, a5 in the Italian seems to be more trendy these days. Play usually goes e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop c4, knight f6, d3, bishop c5, c3, d6. Castles a5, rook e1, h6, knight b2 castles, with the idea of going bishop e6, queen b8, and leaving the c5 bishop there, and not minding white going for d4, and black trading with e takes d4. Not sure if that statement is correct, but yeah, obviously h6 is a popular move there. But in the last World Championship, Magnus employed e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop c4, knight f6. Excellent move, knight f6. d3, bishop c5, c3, d6, castles, a5, rook e1, bishop a7. This bishop retreat seems like a rare setup. Other than taking the sting out of white going for d4, what other purpose does a5, 6, a5, bishop a7 do? What are some ideas for black in this line? I don't know. Make a move that you hope surprise Nepomniachtchi, gets him out of book. I guess that's the main idea. But no, we'll put it on the board. So, good old Italian, yet again. Bishop c4, knight f6, d3, bishop to c5, pawn to c3, pawn to d6. We've talked about castles, d5 earlier. Pawn to d6. All move orders here are still sort of rocket science to me, because everything can change if you start with castles, start with d6, start with a6, start with a5. There's so many subtleties. But yeah, pawn to d6, short castles, and pawn to a5 has recently become the most trendy setup, which I guess is a shift in understanding to some extent. Like, I don't think a6 setups are dead or bad by any stretch, but it seems like, in recent practice, just generally speaking, black players prefer having the pawn here, stopping white from going b4, and in return being okay with having that square weakened. While here, these lines, however you do it, don't quote me on the move order, but stuff like this, they don't seem to mind with white just playing with maybe this micro advantage with the pawn here. I still think these positions are decent for black as well, but it does very much seem like the trend has shifted a little bit towards a5, after which rook e1 is indeed the most popular move. And yeah, you mentioned h6 being the main line here, which very much is. I think I can at least explain the idea behind bishop a7. So after h6, one main line is, how does it go? Knight b2, castles, knight f1. And here you could choose bishop e6. I think that was the line you mentioned. And after bishop b5, play with the bishop on c5. But white started asking all kinds of questions there. This is currently not considered so much fun, like either d4 directly or takes followed by d4. I'm not sure. I was never too big on these lines. But what I want to say is here in this position, bishop a7 would also be a very normal move. It's just a typical prophylactic move in these structures, so that d4 no longer comes with tempo. And if d4 happens, for example, here, you can then often react with some tactics like takes, followed by pawn to d5. So bishop a7 is a fairly standard move. And here, I don't know, after bishop a7, knight g3, play continues, bishop e6, let's say, bishop b5, and knight to e7, which, well, still weird theory. So that is very much an option after h6 still to play with bishop a7. But the point of starting with bishop a7 is that maybe in some lines you don't need h6. h6 is often played to make sure there's no bishop g5. But here bishop g5, if black hasn't castled yet, is at the very least very double-edged, because black has all these plans with h6 and g5 with a mess. So typically, white players don't do that until black has castled. I know there are games, you could argue about that too. And the point is, if white plays knight bd2, which looks standard, now you can castle, and after h3 or knight f1, you can try to do without h6. Like if you played h6 here, we would be in the same position. But if we chose to play bishop a7, but here black doesn't necessarily need h6 and could start with a move like bishop to e6. White goes bishop b5, for example. You can go knight e7, put the knight here, and we might have saved the tempo on h6, which was not a useless move, but maybe not priority number one. So I think that's the idea of this move, bishop a7, basically. As usual, nothing's free. And after bishop a7, white has the bonus option of playing knight a3, which Nepomniachtchi played. There were also some other recent games when this knight can either jump to b5 or go knight c2, bishop e3. Now with the knight committed to a3, I think Magnus played h6. Once again, if castles, bishop g5 becomes a topic with his pin. So I think he played h6, and in that game, Nepomniachtchi went knight c2, which I think is not so critical, at least in the game. How was it? He played rook e8, followed by bishop e6. Computer also thinks that a4 is a good move here, if memory serves. And yeah, it was sort of equal quickly. And recently, there were also some experiments with knight to b5, hitting this bishop, which is more double-edged, because the knight could become an idiot here if black manages to play knight e7 and c6, or it could bother black if black doesn't have time to do that. Now black has to decide where to put this bishop, on b6 or on b8. b8 looks strange, but it was played by Jorn van Foreest, I think, against Kayakin, maybe? I can't recall, but I do think that Jorn played this. The bishop, yeah, looks very passive, keeping these pawns alive here. But if you go knight e7 and c6, it might make a triumphant return. While bishop b6 is the more natural move when, yeah. Ask your computer. There's a bunch of lines that white can try here. h3, stopping bishop g4 is one of them. Castles, bishop e3, takes, and I think the computer wants rook e8, not knight e7 for some reason. When once again, it's a bit unclear if this knight is a weakness or an asset here. I can also try to do this without h3. Play bishop e3 here, takes, short castles. And I guess h3 transposes, and if d4, it does have this move bishop g4, which I thought came quite close to equalizing, but it's still very much a game. But basically, yeah, the idea of this move bishop a7 is it's a standard move, but in slightly different positions, usually after h6. The idea of doing it directly is that if white plays in the most natural fashion with knight bd2, you might not need h6 in some lines. Like you can castle, now there's no pin here, knight f1, and now you can go bishop e6 or even knight e7 here directly and try to do without h6. That's all there is to it. But as I said initially, I wasn't kidding. That a big reason, I would guess, why Magnus did this in the match is that it is not that popular a move, and it probably came as a surprise here, which obviously is worth something as well. So I'm not sure d6, a5, bishop a7 will become the main line. It does open the door for this extra option, but it is one more chapter in this move order poker in the Italian, where either side is comfortable with some things and is not trying to give up some things. Like some players don't like these positions after castles bishop g5, so they don't want to do that. Some don't want to play with h6 so early. Yeah, there are different ways to tackle this. Like mentioned, there's a plan with castles and d5, which is still possible. There's also the plan to go d6, a6, bishop a7 against everything, allowing white to grab the space and then saying, yeah, so what, I'm still solid. And d6, a5, rook e1, and now h6, bishop a7, or whatnot, or castle is also still legal, has become the latest battleground where the outcome is unclear. I'm not convinced bishop a7 will be the main line, but it was a good surprise for one game. And was a game that won Magnus the title. He went on to win this game. So it did its job admirably there. I hope I managed to explain the ideas, at least. Of course, there's always a lot of lines hidden behind any of these moves, and I keep being confused even if I looked at them. Was this the position where you start with h6, where you go without h6, where you start with bishop e6, where you start with bishop e7? Italian is rough, which is why I have sympathy for this. Castles, castles followed by d5 plans, where at least we force the issue a bit. So there's that. Since today is our Italian episode, I hope you don't mind, because there's one, I'll skip 2-3 questions here, which we'll do in the next episode, and get to Mr. Crispyambulance, who is asking another Italian question. He's saying, hi Jan, good to see your COVID clinic has shut and the opening clinic has reopened again. Never had a COVID clinic, but yeah, let's hope for the best with Chicken Chess Club extension. Black plays 3 knight f6 against the Italian, rather than bishop c5 as in lonesboule's question above. After d4 ed, e5, d5, bishop b5, knight e4, knight d4, bishop d7, bishop c6, bc, bishop c5, f3, knight g5. We come to the big tabia for this line. Gawain Jones, or Hawaii Jones, that's a good nickname, according to my spell checker, in his recent book, talks about the choice between 11 bishop e3 and 11 bishop f4. Here, and the pros and cons between each choice, and how they often transpose. I'm confused already. As white will almost certainly play both these moves anyway, but there are different deviations black can choose, and wonder what your take on it is. You don't trust Hawaii Jones? I'm sure he's a much bigger expert than me. I play both as white and black in this kind. So 1, as white, would you choose f4 or bishop e3, and why? 2, as black, what would you play against each of these options? Hawaii decided on bishop e3 in the end as his main line, but my database says f4 is twice as popular. Pretty sure Gawain has a database too. Now it is Jan the Oracle to decide the debate once and for all. Many thanks. P.S. Good to see Yanistan is supporting its near neighbor, Ukraine. Very much so. So where is a chessboard? Here we are, 3 bishop c4, knight f6, d4. As mentioned, that's one of the quote-unquote drawbacks of starting with knight f6, that he allowed this line. I was never very concerned about it, but after d4, ed, e5, in my chessable course, I gave the move knight e4, which I still like. I think this is pretty much a way to shut down this line for white. I don't know, I haven't seen what Gawain says about it, but from where I was sitting, I'm a fan of this move for black. So this was my recommendation, and I still haven't seen anything that changed my mind here. But of course, d5 is the main line. Bishop b5, how does this go? Knight e4, knight d4. Here there's bishop c5 as well. No, wasn't bishop c5 some attempt to force a draw? I'm not into details after d5, as I said. But I guess I should just answer the question. Bishop d7 takes, castles, bishop c5, f3, knight g5. And now your big question is if bishop e3 or f4, and what the difference is and what is better. As far as I can see, if you start with f4, I guess the main move is knight back to e4, bishop to e3. I was always a bit scared of these lines as black because I'm so worried about ending up in some dark square bind, like knight d2, you take, knight b3, and we just positionally lost. So black should do something. As far as I can see in this move order, there's this extra option of queen to b8, which seems to be working more or less. Once again, not an expert. But this seemed to be an extra option with f4, knight e4 included. I don't know. My main line at bigger depths with like queen d3, queen b2, takes, some weird stuff. a3 to take the square from the queen is to go back, knight b3. And black is a pawn up, but white has established this bind. Which, yeah, computers say is equal, bishop f5. And who am I to doubt them? But it's a weird position. But from my little checking, it looked to me like queen b8 was a nice little bonus option here. Well, the main line is what? Bishop b6, knight d2, some c5, knight f3 takes. I don't know how this goes. Queen takes. And yeah, I always struggled understanding these positions. I guess black is fine, but it's very confusing to me. So with black in this f4 move order, I guess I would try to click my way home in this queen b8, which, yeah, don't ask me why it works, but after b3, bishop b6, it seems like this inclusion favors black, so white has to do something sharp. Therefore, I would also lean towards starting with bishop e3, when for some reason queen b8 didn't work so well. Not because the knight is hanging, apparently, but because now there's knight d2, and this knight is sort of floating, and queen b2, knight 2 b3 didn't seem to work. So bishop e3 ruled out the evil queen b8. I guess the main line, I should stop saying I'm not an expert, but yeah, not an expert. I guess the difference from black's point of view is here, he doesn't have to go knight e4. He has this alternative c5, which once again seems to lead to weird, messy positions. After f takes g, c takes d, bishop takes d4, and c6. When good old compy says black is fine. But it's confusing. Like knight c3, queen g5, takes, queen d4. At first sight, I'd be a little worried, but I guess the computer is just not too concerned about any of this. And in the end, he will say that black just has no issues. So after f4, c5, I don't know, there's also this move, knight b3, knight e4 is no good because the pawn is hanging, but black has pawn to d4, bishop f2, and now knight to e4. And once again, I'm slightly confused about the position. I keep saying that, but that's because I am. Knight d2, bishop c6. And yeah, I don't know how to read any of this. Like here, c4. Computers say black is fine. But I'm worried about this weird bishop. So objectively, well, I'm not going to bust the computer here or anybody. It will be zeros and will be okay for black. But such stuff, for example, would concern me more than starting with f4 and going for this forced line with queen b8. So my verdict is, seems like it's 0-0 everywhere. I would go bishop e3 because it feels trickier to me. These bishop b6, f4 lines. Then the f4, knight e4, bishop e3, queen b8 lines. But what I would really do is not allow any of this nonsense and meet e5 with knight e4, which is fairly clean as far as I know. So that concludes today's almost Italian special, I think, with one or two, not two Queen's Gambit questions maybe. And yeah, it's a struggle. It's a struggle, the Italian, but it's also fascinating that nowadays it seems like it's almost more debated than the Ruy Lopez, even at the highest levels, which we can also blame the Berlin for. But that the Italian would prove such rich territory, I, for one, was and still sort of am surprised by. Anyway, I hope we learned something. I certainly did. Thank you so much for watching, and see you in the next episode. Until then.